Hey Modrunners, welcome to another episode of Modrenman. Today's episode is a photography episode, and we're going to be talking more specifically about aperture and f-stop, as well as shutter speed. And basically what I want to tell you about, and there are a ton of other videos and more details, but I'm noticing a lot of people out there are having difficulties understanding what is f-stop, what is aperture, what are all these things. And basically what it is, if you think about it, is your camera lens is going to act like the iris of your eyeball. And it opens and closes. And so basically the f-stop, which is also another name for the aperture, is going to be the size, how big or how small that opening is going to be. In a minute we're going to go over to the faucet and I'll give you an example of what all that is. But the basic way to understand it is basically letting light in and out. Same reason why your irises, your pupils dilate, change, size, is the amount of light that opens up, that's let in. And so, when it's really dark out, your eyeball, your iris is really large because it's you want to let a lot of light in so you can see everything. Same thing's true when you go from a bright outside into the dark, how your eyes kind of take a minute to adjust. That's your iris opening and closing. And the camera is the same way with the lens. Some cameras have the aperture built into the camera itself. Other ones have the aperture attached to the lens. So depending upon what you're doing, that's going to make a difference. So the way to think about it is the f-stop or the aperture, a large aperture, say a 2.8. You say 2.8, that's not very big. f/22, what that is 2.8 means that the size of the aperture is going to have two sizes and then a 0.8 of it between the lens and the actual film slide or your digital sensor. Another way of thinking about it is a small aperture is a large number because f/22 is going to have 22, if you line them up, sizes between your lens and, let's say, your digital sensor. So that's the way you think of it. So a small aperture is got a large f number, f/22, and a large aperture has got a small f number, f/2.8 or f/1.2. Those are typical numbers that you're looking at. All right, so now that you understand kind of the idea of the aperture opening and closing, letting the amount of light through, the shutter speed has something to do with it. So, for instance, if I have a large aperture, okay, f/2.8, and it's letting a lot of light through, I don't want a lot of light to come in to expose a lot of time. So I'm going to have a very quick shutter speed. Same thing's true if I have a very small aperture, very tiny. I need to let a lot of light into there, so it's going to take a lot longer. So now let's go over to the faucet so you can get an idea of kind of what I'm talking about. All right, so let's go over to the faucet. Okay, so here we are at the faucet. And so basically the way I want you to think about it is that shutter speed is the amount of time that it's going to take to fill up a cup. So here we have a cup, and we're going to fill it up. Now, if I open up the aperture all the way, so it's a large aperture, meaning it's like an f/2.8, once again thinking about the amount of size, I'm going to open up all the way. And it opens up all the way, and it took about, 4 seconds for it to fill up the cup. Now, I'm going to open up a small aperture, and you'll see how much longer. Now, small aperture means I'm just going to open it up a little bit. And this is shutter speed. This is how much it's going to take to properly expose, if we're thinking about a light, with a small aperture. Aperture is going to take a long time to fill up the cup. And our metaphor for filling up the cup is letting light in so that it exposes our digital sensor or our film properly. And that's basically f-stop and shutter speed. Hopefully that gives you a little bit more of an explanation on how it works. There are other tricks that you can do to expose your digital sensor, changing the ISO, other things like that. But basically, get a good handle on your f-stop. Go out and play with your f-stop. Go out and play with, changing it. Expose the same picture with a small aperture, f22, and see how long it takes to expose it properly. And then go out and open up your aperture to f4.0 and see how it'll be a lot shorter amount of time to expose that same picture. So I hope that was helpful for you. Once again, f-stop and aperture are the same thing. It's just the way we talk about it. A large aperture, meaning a large opening, is going to be a low number because it's going to take that amount of size, think of it that way, to the space between the lens and your sensor. F2.8 is a great example. And then a small aperture, a very large f number, f22, is going to be a tiny aperture because there's going to be 22 of them between the lens and your digital sensor. Shutter speed is the amount of time that the actual aperture is opened, letting light in onto your digital sensor or your film. Pretty much everybody nowadays is shooting digital, so I probably won't talk about film as much anymore, maybe a little bit more, but basically that's it. So small aperture, space between your lens and your sensor, and then amount of time that it takes to reach in. Now, somebody might ask me before I let you go, well, why don't I just always shoot at a large aperture or a small aperture? Well, there's something that's very specific, and we call it depth of field. And if you haven't heard about depth of field before, it's about the amount of things between what you're shooting and what's in focus and what's not in focus. And the reason why we don't just always shoot at f22 or f2.8, there's everything in between, is your depth of field, what you want to do. Depth of field, the smaller the aperture, f22, the more depth of field you have in focus between your subject, in front of it, and in behind it. Same thing's true if you are shooting a portrait of someone and you want just the person in focus, but you want everything else behind them. You want a shallow depth of field, so you're going to shoot it at a very large aperture. f1.2, f1.4, f2.8, things like that. So things behind it are all out of focus, and they call those things out of focus behind it bokeh. And you can look online about bokeh and all that stuff. There's tons of different videos out there. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about f-stop and shutter speed today. Go out and play with your cameras. Go out, have fun, go do those couple of tests and see what you like. Play with depth of field now, shooting at a small aperture and a large aperture, bokeh, all those things. Go out, have a great weekend, but no matter what it is you do out there, find your passion.